Hello and welcome to Women in Cleantech and Sustainability and Women's Energy Network New York Chapter's Collaborative Community Solar event. Thank you so much for sharing your time here with us. We value it so much and really couldn't do this event without the support we have from our network. So what is community solar? That is really the question we're here to answer, and kind of what it actually looks like, both from the development, finance, and legal perspective. I think for all of us, a lot of us appreciate, believe in, want solar in our lives and want to partake in the mitigation of climate change, but maybe it's not accessible to us by putting it on our roofs if we are renters or live in apartment buildings or have a giant tree over our house that casts a wide shadow. So what I'm really excited to learn about here is what community solar can do to solve that problem. So we have an hour here. We'll start, and I'll try to keep my intros as brief as possible, then a panel discussion, followed by a Q&A. So please do put your questions in the chat, and a wrap up at the end. I think we're all fairly accustomed to Zoom at this point, whether we like it or not. And so the name of the game really is just respecting the speakers, the moderator, the volunteers by muting yourself appropriately, but also bringing your full self to the table by sharing your LinkedIn, changing your name, and being on video as much as possible. It's truly what you put into it is what you'll get out, and networking is so crucial to us in this industry. So Women in Cleantech and Sustainability, we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We're based in San Francisco, but are now in 13 countries and have a virtual platform that is growing so widely, thanks to you all. And I think what we want is to continue our virtual membership, and all of our members do get these virtual events for free. So if you want to get this event for free, we'll reimburse you if you become a member today. So check out this QR code, could be a good option for you. We have 3 upcoming events, which are very exciting. One is on pollution and fashion. One is on ESG impact reporting, and our big summit to celebrate our 10-year anniversary is in November on the 10th. Mark your calendars. There's a lot of opportunity to be a speaker, a sponsor, a participant, what have you. This is kind of our biggest collaborative event. So do reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any sort of connection that you would like to incorporate here. Women's Energy Network of Greater New York City is our co-host, and we so appreciate them joining us and leading the charge on planning this event and bringing together all the speakers, especially my co-worker in this realm, Jamie Go. So thank you so much, Jamie, for all your work and for Women's Energy Network. So what is this event about? This is Reaching Climate Goals with Community Solar. I'm just the moderator. I don't know that much about community solar. I do work in project finance, though, at Leeward Renewable Energy, and do utility scale solar, wind, and storage projects. Today's sponsor is Borrego. We really appreciate our sponsors, since this is a nonprofit run almost entirely by volunteers. So thank you, Borrego. And here are our 3 speakers. So I will let Johana and Ines and Annie introduce themselves further and talk about kind of the niche that they hold in the sector. And so we are going to now have Johana started off, and I think what would be really helpful is, I personally work in solar and project finance and know very little about community solar, which is kind of embarrassing. So I think what would be helpful is, in layman's terms, if you could explain also what we're all talking about. So kicking it off with Johana.
Well, answer to that question, or do you want me to introduce myself as well? Or you're good with that?
It would be great for you to introduce yourself, answer that question, and tell us, like, what is the niche that you're coming to this event with?
Yeah, perfect. Do both. So my name's Johana Afenjar. Hi, everyone. I was until very recently the capital markets lead for Clearway, and I'm now the head of project finance for an infrastructure company. For the past 7 years, I've worked, lived, slept, talking about working on community solar in particular. So Clearway is a wind, solar, and battery storage developer, and was one of the pioneers developing community solar in the US. And so my role was to help finance those projects, which were a new niche, a new asset class. What is it? Community solar is residential solar without a roof, if you wish. So in other words, it's a way for people and companies, commercial and industrial companies, to decide that they want to buy renewable electricity, basically, without having to build solar on their premises. And so the way they do that is by bilaterally entering into a contract with a generator like Clearway, where we generate solar somewhere, use the grid, and deliver basically renewable energy to those people. So it's not physical. It's basically a contract where we use the grid, and for each kilowatt hour that we produce, then someone somewhere buys 1 kilowatt hour that is based on renewable energy. And so it's amazing because it gives access to people who don't have the capacity, the roof, the space, you name it, to be able to choose to go renewables.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Johana. So Ines, what does it mean kind of for Silicon Valley Bank to be involved in this? Like, what are you all interested in? What's your niche?
Thank you, Caroline. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Ines. I've been doing project finance for around 15 years now, different geographies, different sectors, and I'm currently a director on the Silicon Valley Bank project finance team, where we specifically focus on innovation and financing of renewables, broadly speaking. What does community solar mean to us? I'd start by saying we like to say we're the lead bank in the community solar financing space. It's something we're very proud of. We participated in most of the financings that have been done in community solar. Some of them with Johana, and she, when Johana was at Clearway, and she grilled us on it, and we learned a lot together in doing new structures and how to look at problems within the community solar space, and also with Annie on the legal side. So it's a pleasure to join both of them here. We at Silicon Valley Bank, we were very early entrants to this space, and it helped that the fact that we were already familiar with financing residential solar. So we already understood how to underwrite to a pool of residential and commercial and industrial subscribers. So that is still one of the differentiating factors for us. We have very relevant knowledge on this space. We understand what the challenges are, both for the developers or sponsors and for banks. And we know where we can provide flexibility and what really are must-haves for the banks. And I think that's really helpful. As I have two examples on this. One is due diligence. These are a pool of smaller sites. And so due diligence on those smaller sites can be a lot of work. And we continue to work with sponsors to try to figure out what the correct balance is, where we can find economies of scale, so to speak. So what due diligence do we need to do for every single asset in the portfolio, or where we can streamline and just do an overall review. Then the other point, which I'm going to highlight, and happy to answer questions about that, typically banks have required historically FICO scores for the financing of residential subscribers. And we're moving away from that in community solar, which I think is really good. I think credit-wise is the right decision because assets can be resubscribed. The default rates are generally low, and it broadens the addressable market for these assets. So those are two things that I would highlight as things that SEB does and hopefully doing well.
Awesome. Thank you, Ines. And Annie, you're at a legal firm. Why is that an important player in this sector?
I think, hi everyone, my name is Annie Tsai. I'm an attorney at Foley and Lardner. And I think to answer your question quickly here, Caroline, we really want to make sure that, being in the renewable energy space, we want to make sure that renewable energy is accessible for everyone, right? So I think just as previously Ines spoke about, and also Johana, that this is a way of bringing solar energy for folks that don't normally have the opportunity to, build something on their rooftop, or in a state like California where we do have a lot more solar and renewable policies in place. So just taking a step back, a little bit about our firm and what we do. I think community solar, just as what Ines said, and also Johana, I think we probably consider that a niche market probably a decade ago or 8 years ago, but we don't really think that it's a niche financing space anymore. With sponsors like Clearway and heavy hitters in the banking space, including SVB, who are providing financing in this space. And I think as a firm, we really, as lawyers, we follow where our clients go, right, and where the needs are. And we were fortunate enough to be in this space about a decade ago with multiple members of our group working with sponsors that were first pioneers in the space and understanding the community solar space from the beginning, from various first community solar structures in Colorado and Minnesota, for example. And then given that knowledge, we've been able to, really analyze new state rules as various state policies roll out for community solar. And we're able to draw on our previous experiences to be thoughtful and inventive in this new space. And in addition to that, I think the piece here that's typically missing from utility scale is that there's a large consumer piece of it. So as a firm, Foley and Lardner, we have a strong consumer financing practice group as well, where we really analyze consumer protection pieces with respect to interfacing with customers. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to kind of come right back to you, Annie, on what you were saying about kind of the legal role of making sure community solar is acceptable. What does it mean to be acceptable? Like, what are the characteristics that are required for one of these deals to work?
Sure, Caroline. So generally speaking, there are just certain features that make community solar, recognizable as community solar projects. So most likely these are smaller projects that have a maximum capacity of a maximum project size under regulation. So obviously states want to promote projects that are smaller in size for folks to really participate in. So typically they're from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt range as a cap. And then location also matters. We really want this to be, states want this to be more of a distributed generation model. So really you don't want to make sure that projects are not next to each other. The spirit of community solar isn't that you build a large project and then slice it up to various smaller pieces to qualify for community solar. And then another aspect of community solar is really having multiple subscribers, right? So making sure that there is a minimum number of subscribers per project, and then also a maximum size for subscription. So for example, in a lot of earlier stages of community solar policies, there were only requirements for a minimum of 4 subscribers, and then there was a really a large maximum. So a lot of times it was only geared towards commercial customers, right? So getting the policy right in terms of encouraging residential customers is also a goal here in community solar. So as we go on, we've seen a lot of policies becoming a little bit simpler or becoming more standard. So I think some of my colleagues, Ines and Johana, will probably also speak to this and how we've seen this grow into more of bespoke transactions to more and more streamlined process.
Got it. Yeah. And as Johana, what policies trends are you seeing?
I think, and to kind of piggyback on what Annie was saying, one of the big issues in community solar is that at the end of the day, those projects are just, regular projects. And so they require the same amount of work as a very big project. So you may have a 5 megawatt community solar project, but it's going to require you the same amount of work as a 200 megawatt utility scale project in terms of due diligence. Not necessarily permitting an interconnection might be simplified because of the rules, but generally it's hard. And so anything that can help streamline, scale, kind of like make it more automatized helps. And so one of the things, and we were talking about that with Ines earlier, one of the things that has been in the pipe in New York in particular and in other states has been net crediting. So I'm sure we'll talk about that, which is a way for the customer to only get 1 bill instead of 2. And so Ines may be able to speak even more about that. But basically that helps, because one thing that we've had an issue with as a developer was that customers would tell us, wait, I don't understand. I'm going to get a bill from the utility, but then I'm going to get a bill from you, Clearway, and I kind of need to understand how all this works. So anything that simplifies and helps streamlines helps. So that's one example of a policy development. On the contrary, maybe just to kind of give you an example of what does not, things that, as always, when regulations change, it really is an issue. And so Illinois has had a problem recently on the budget for community solar, for example, which has been so detrimental to making progress in developing in that state. It's been resolved since then, but for us, it took us 6 months of our time focusing on this and trying to figure out a solution. So policies are improving, and net crediting is an example. And let's also always remind our policymakers that they need to make sure that regulation does not change, remains certain, so that investment can be made and progress. Yeah, I don't know, Ines, if you have anything to add to that.
Absolutely, I agree with stability. Banks like that too, and a path to better regulation. And because this is kind of a new sector, not as much anymore, but regulation still moving, especially in certain states, it's important to continue to work to improve regulation and how it applies to projects. I agree. I'll just, before I dive into consolidated building, which is what Johana was talking about, I want to talk about that from a lender's perspective and how it helps us too. I would also say that on a macro level, we have never seen as much push as we're seeing now for distributed generation, including community solar. So I think the Biden administration is pushing for that at a federal level, whereas up to now, we had only seen it at a state-by-state level. And I think this is great for the industry. I would also, I've recently read the Local Solar for All roadmap. You can probably check it online, and they're also getting a lot of good press with that paper. So people are just paying more attention to community solar in general. So as Johana was mentioning, the consolidated billing, that is great from a subscriber perspective, right? We don't have multiple bills that we have to look at, and we just have one bill that we pay. That's the utility bill, and includes the community solar subscription in there. I don't like many bills. I don't like paperwork. So as much simplified as the process can be, that's great for the subscribers. But then from a banking perspective, it also helps because this is a bit of an exaggeration and broadly speaking, but basically it means that at least for a certain period of time, banks would be taking the utility risk, as the utility would be paying the project as opposed to each specific subscriber. So as you can all imagine, while we are comfortable with end subscribers, that adds a layer of protection that's really helpful to underwrite financings too.
Got it. I think I am, in project finance, somewhat following. I think maybe we need to take a moment and talk about like operationally what this looks like. What is, net billing? Why is it that I in California am not participating in community solar? Like, is it not available to me, or like, am I just uneducated? Like, should I go out and do that? I think it would be helpful to kind of understand those barriers. Would any of you want to kind of jump in on that?
This is Annie. I think it really goes back to, I'll take a stab at that. I think it really goes back to, just what we'd like to see, which is more of a federal level, mandate. But right now, what we really see is a state-by-state implementation of what states would like to see for community solar goals. And a lot of times, there are a lot of stakeholders involved in various states that may or may not like the fact that there is a community solar program out there, right? So there are regulators that need to, make sure that the rules are equal for a lot of the customer, in general and in the state. And so you see a lot of what Johana mentioned, which is like, a stop and go kind of a situation where it really depends on state regulation and state politics to a certain extent. So that's why a lot of times you'll see some states that are extremely successful at community solar. And then, we run into issues there too, like, in Massachusetts and New York, a lot of times, the capacity that's allocated for community solar runs out, right? So then there is then another process of policymaking going on in order to increase more of the capacity for these various programs.
Got it. That's helpful. So what are the states where it's great, and what are the states where it'll be impossible for a long time?
And basically what that means is that it's really state specific. So these are, community solar relies on a regulatory framework in order for kind of like the permitting aspect to be easier, being able to, get an interconnection approval, if you mean, without having to go through the entire process that utility scale has to do. So there's a regulatory framework that needs to exist, and it does not exist everywhere in the US. It's not something that's dealt with at the federal level. It's dealt with locally. Okay, great states. So I can tell you in the past, those that kind of were the pioneers and the first states we were active in it started with Colorado actually for us in 2015. And then the big active states we've been active in have been Minnesota, Massachusetts, New York, and Illinois. So these are really the big ones. And if you kind of like count those in those states, only at Clearway, we developed and financed close to 500 megawatts, which is huge. There are new states in the Northeast and even in more of the central region. So I think Michigan is a new state, Pennsylvania. So there are new states coming in and implementing their policies. And so if you're somewhere and, just like you, Caroline, you were asking, okay, I'm in California, is it just that I don't know that it exists, or is it that it does not exist? So you just kind of like go online and type community solar in your state, and you'll see, because there's a lot of ads. I mean, Clearway, wherever we were active, we would kind of blast a lot of advertising, so it'll be easy. But generally speaking, there were kind of like, to my last count, probably about a dozen at the most states that were kind of like active or about to be active in the space.
Interesting, cool. Do you think, are we at it sounds kind of like, a dozen, there's 50 states, like in theory, we should be at the ramp up of community solar. Does it feel at all that we are kind of on the ramp? Are we plateauing? Are we on the decline? Kind of what do you think about market saturation for community solar? Maybe Ines, if you could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I think I'm very positive and optimistic. I think more and more states will develop and adopt regulation that supports community solar, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So hopefully that will continue to be a big trend. In terms of saturation of subscribers, I don't think we're there at all yet. So that's why we're having this panel, because most of us are not even familiar with community solar and how we can subscribe. I think there is a broad base of consumers that are still available, including residential and CNI, so small like companies in your area that want more solar that are not able to get it. We track at SCB, we track market saturation in terms of subscribers in the markets where active financing community solar, and it's really low currently, so there's a lot of room for growth in that area. I think I have the data here somewhere. I think the addressable market is still expected to grow by about 1 terabyte. So it's a lot. Yeah.
So in the states, you're saying in the states where community solar is possible, there's still low subscription. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
In the states where it is possible, there are a lot of people who aren't buying into it, even though it's available.
There are two issues. Yes, so a lot of people can still buy into it, but I don't know, I think either Annie or Johana mentioned this before, there are caps on the amount of community solar projects that can be developed by state. So that can be an issue too. I know in the New York area, there's a wait list for people that want to subscribe to community solar. So it really depends on the area we're talking about. There may or may not be capacity, but I think it's growing over time.
And I think one reason, so the market can be as big as the number of, the market can be huge, but what has limited the addressable market historically, but it's changing, has been the limitation around the type of customer, and especially the FICO scores, because our financiers and legitimately so, had requirements around what type of customers we were contracting, especially from a FICO score perspective. So they had to be a minimum FICO and an average FICO of our portfolio. A lot of customers don't want to give you their FICO score. So that already kind of kills and reduces the addressable market. That's changing. And I think banks have been very innovative on that. I think we need tax equity investors to be innovative on that. And the market has been very limited in terms of the availability of tax equity funds. We can talk about that, but that kind of like in terms of addressable market, that has reduced it. So a lot of people can say, I really want to do this, but they don't meet the FICO score requirements, or they're not a single family home, they're more in a condo, like some very artificial requirements that made it very complicated. Thankfully, this is changing, and now also programs include, low and middle income kind of like bonuses. If you contract community solar with low and middle income households, then you're going to get a remuneration that is better. So that's going to definitely help widen the market and make it accessible to even more people.
Yeah, that is, one of the most important questions out there is community solar for everyone? Is everyone going to be able to access this, or is this being designed for wealthy people? Like, how is the industry making this an equitable resource?
I can go. I think in general, community solar is great to make solar energy accessible for more people. And I would highlight two things in that regard. First, it represents a discount to the retail rate or whatever rate is applicable to that end user. And so that in and of itself just makes it better economic sense for people, including people with lower income. And then we're seeing a new trend, I think it's a new trend, that certain states are actually requiring, like Johana was saying, LMI, low to moderate income percentage of users, of subscribers in community solar projects. While for banks, that requires additional understanding of the risk. I think that's useful for everybody because it really does democratize access to solar energy.
Got it. That's super helpful. I think we are definitely getting closer to understanding. I know a lot of people are also putting awesome questions in the chat and also resources. I've seen some awesome resources come through, which is such a testament to the knowledge base of this group. So thank you for sharing. And just on the last, does anyone want to add anything on the equity portion? Or I think we could also dive into some of the questions from the audience. Cool. No worries.
No, so, I mean, maybe one thing that I'll say, sorry, because like just thinking about access to all and the power of, you know, the equity investments, like that question about community solar not being only for the rich is a big one, because theoretically and initially when it was started, actually the idea was the opposite. It was, all right, let's give people who don't have, you know, a house with the perfect roof or a company that does not have the perfect premises, the ability to buy solar. So that's the philosophy, and it's amazing. But in practice, because, and I think it's been, you know, somehow because of the regulation, but also most importantly, because of the requirements from financiers and tax equity providers, or it actually has been, at the beginning, it was really only for the rich or very high FICO scores and people who could afford to meet all the requirements. And luckily, through that, it's tested, it's been tested, and now we see that it works. And so now it can expand to a broader set of customers. But like, you know, to everyone out there, keep in mind that it's always the same issue. Like, whoever brings the capital brings also the opportunities. And so investors, bankers, and it's a hard task, but it's kind of like their responsibility to push things forward. And so we rely on them as well. So I guess that's a message for whoever out there has some of that power. But it's a very important question. Sorry, a lot of interesting questions indeed in the chat. So
yeah, for sure.
Out to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Johana. Two questions earlier on from Alyssa and Rosanna about California in particular, and kind of why it's not there, you know, such a proactive green state. And it seems like there's some kind of regulatory and policy barriers and interconnection. So in particular, asking about the rules around CPUC, considering to levy on rooftop solar owners, and also interconnection being very onerous. Does anyone kind of have some insights into California? No, that's a very specific state.
I can speak to a little bit of what I've seen, and this is, I work in energy storage, helping startups really create their engineering teams. And what I'm seeing is that the utilities really are influencing so much of what we are and aren't allowed to do. And they very much are having a hard time with this new mindset of how energy storage can help when you have so much solar going onto the grid all at the times when a lot of residential customers don't need it. And so there's just been a tremendous amount of pressure to actually slow down the amount of rooftop solar that's, you know, being advocated from a lot of different angles, because we haven't figured that out yet of how to do energy storage. So just one thought is, you know, it's going to be really important to pair how we pair how we have, you know, the ability to use energy when we really need it, which, you know, with residential is in the evenings.
Awesome. Thank you so much for jumping in there, Sonia. I think we haven't even really touched on storage or wind. Like, I'd be curious, what is there community wind? Is there community storage? Is that like a thing that is possible, or is there a reason why it's solar?
Typically, so first of all, storage now is combined with, typically now storage is generally combined with solar and community solar projects. So, you know, in Massachusetts in particular, and in Illinois now, all projects that are being developed with storage attached, which makes it amazing because then you kind of have the full solution. Remember that community solar is not on your premises. So typically you're going to have a small power plant. So it's going to be up to 5 megawatts. So it's not a huge kind of like footprint when you compare to a big project, located not too far from the load center, which is another advantage of it. You don't need to build a huge transmission line. You can make generation closer to where the energy is consumed. And so for reasons around development, permitting, interconnection, it's really kind of geared towards solar only, not wind, but it does definitely contemplate storage. And California, I love it as my kind of home state, but California is thinking very hard, and it's very innovative in the way we can kind of bring renewable energy all together as a full solution. And I think there's a way to, there's still work to be done, but there are in the list of states that are trying to figure out how to do community solar, but they're figuring out so many things at the same time. So, you know, we'll see how that goes and California has a lot of big utility scale projects, which, you know, Massachusetts did not necessarily have in solar. So that, you know, states, it also depends on the particularities of where the state is located, the weather, etc. So some projects make more sense than others.
Got it. I want to now kind of pass the torch to my co-host, Jamie, to ask a few questions. Jamie, if you are ready, I think you had a couple lined up.
Saw one on the tax equity side, and I thought that was, you know, something really interesting to touch on. So, you know, as a developer, is it harder to line up your tax equity investors and financial stakeholders for these projects versus non-community solar?
Yes, big time.
I think
I don't know what
I think
to
this
say.
question really goes to, yeah, I think this question also really goes to like barriers to entry, right? I think one of the issues that we talked about as well is just understanding, you know, various regulatory frameworks in various states. And I think education even from top to bottom, right? From banks, from tax equity investors, all the way down to, you know, everyday local like residences that want to subscribe. Like, it's a process that's non-monetary, but it's still a barrier, like understanding all of the like pieces that go together. So I think that's also true for tax equity investors, when a lot of people are not comfortable with, you know, every single, you know, we've all seen utility scale projects over and over again. Everyone's really comfortable understanding where their risks are. And in terms of community solar, it's a little bit more of an educational barrier for a lot of folks.
I mean, Johana knows more about this than I do, but I would say we have seen improvements, right? We have seen more and more tax equity providers entering into the space, the same way we've seen more and more banks entering into the space, which is good.
Also, some federal legislation at the federal level may help, because once you can, so maybe for those who don't know what tax equity is, just like this is just a way for renewable energy projects to be financed, because it brings a financial investor into the mix to be able to monetize all the federal incentives for renewables. But legislation at the federal level is about to change, and one way may be for developers to just tap on direct pay, which will be a way to get to monetize all those benefits without having to raise tax equity. And I think for community solar in particular, it might help. So there's hope, but it's hard.
And do you see, you know, more tax equity like appetite for community solar these days? Like, is that kind of ramping up or stable?
Well, I think, yeah.
Oh, we're certainly hopeful for more, you know, projects we love to do. One more question I saw that I thought was good. So, Annie, I guess when you're working on these projects, like, and this is really broad, but what legally, you know, could go wrong?
Oh, you know, a lot of things that we focus on in terms of financing, working side by side with banks and sponsors, is to understand, you know, interconnection is a big issue, right? It's the uncertainty, again, I'm going back, it's uncertainty of the policies in the various states, right? Understanding, starting from, for example, in Massachusetts, the SMART program, right? A lot of understanding when the community solar capacities are fully subscribed, like when projects are no longer able to develop under community solar policies, and then to understanding, you know, whether or not interconnection is possible. And those are just understanding the timelines and understanding, you know, just the regulatory constraints, really, that of which each project needs to develop. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, you know, just like we said, permits might expire, you know, like awards might expire. So those are things that we really look for in community solar development and financing from the legal perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And these awards are usually like long-term, right?
Yeah, but when they're initially awarded, there's a specific time
Right.
the various sponsors need to build in order to receive that incentive. But I think a lot of times when we look at construction financing, we're really looking at the timeline and the feasibility of it. I think a lot of the deals that, you know, I've worked with SVB on, you know, really focus on that.
Mm. Yep. Thanks. That's really helpful. And just moving on to the next question, which I thought was pretty topical. Do you see community solar being impacted by the current supply chain issues in the industry? And how do you think the, you know, CS industry will, you know, potentially adjust to rising solar prices?
We've seen delays, especially in deliveries of some of the components related to storage, for example. I don't know what will happen. It's on a case-by-case basis, but scheduling and planning projects, construction timelines, and deliveries now. I mean, we took the kind of initiative of being more conservative, and especially post-COVID. So that was really a big learning experience for us in terms of scheduling and making sure the timelines are respected. So developers are learning and adapting all the time. And in those circumstances where you have, supply chain issues, we work with all the stakeholders to get the flexibility we need and build in the schedules, the potential delays and all that. It's really kind of like a learn as you go process. You need to adapt.
Yeah, I think from a bank's perspective is we trust the sponsors to source the equipment, but we also have to understand when there are delays and what the causes for the delays are. I do think, I don't know if Johana and Annie agree, but given that our smaller sites, it may be easier to source equipment for each specific site as opposed to one big utility scale site. So that's a positive for individual community solar sites.
Thank you both. This next question is from Shruti. What environmental attributes are passed to subscribers, and who owns the renewable energy certificates of the community solar project?
Yeah, Annie might be able to kind of be more on point than me, but typically the project keeps the environmental attributes in most, and then so they're not passed on to the customers because they can't really monetize them. And so then they're dealt with like any other attribute that we would generate from projects. I don't know, Annie, if you have anything to kind of like keep me honest on this one.
No, I think you're right. I think a lot of the times, sponsors monetize them by selling them to the utility mostly, right? And then in terms of community solar, it's really for subscribers, it's really just the idea of your energy coming from a community solar project.
Got it. So just to expand on that a little bit, so they can be sold to the utilities through which those electrons are basically being passed to the larger customers, is what you're saying, right? And the utilities can claim them to be part of their portfolio.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, gotcha.
So these projects are connected to the grid, and it's really, as Johana said from the beginning, it's really just kind of a virtual. Well, I guess virtual is also a very technical word here, but it's not a physical electron like you would see if you built a solar rooftop, right? Because you're actually consuming the electrons that you're producing up on your rooftop. But these community solar projects, it's really just allocating the kilowatts they're putting in on the grid to your specific consumption as a residential customer.
Got it. Got it. And is it okay if I ask one more follow-up question on that? I don't want to like take up the whole thing.
Yeah, I think one more follow-up question and then we'll wrap up from there.
Okay, thank you. So in that case, so when it gets passed on to the utility, and if the utility is claiming those attributes, many utilities have their renewable energy portfolios that are sort of in some cases mandated by the state. And do those get counted towards that renewable energy portfolio that the utilities are claiming that they have? Yeah, okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Jamie, for asking questions. I am going to sadly have to start to wrap up this awesome panel. We'll be sharing my screen again. So thank you again so much for joining us today, to our amazing speakers. You all are so insightful, and I am so happy that I am connected to you and can link in and continue to learn from you. And if you all are interested, I hope you enjoyed your time here with WCS and Women's Energy Network. If you would like to come to more events, as aforementioned, we have a great panel on fashion pollution, and then ESG reporting, and then the 10-year summit, and then WEN also has this awesome event that Jamie touched on earlier, and so definitely put that on your calendar and check out their website. And both organizations have mentoring programs. I participated in the mentorship program for WCS, and I am still in touch with my mentor 2 years later. So I would highly recommend, seeking that out if you don't already have someone you're connected with. Today's volunteers, you saw a little of me, myself, and Jamie. We also had awesome support from marketing lead, and behind the scenes was our volunteer coordinator, Kirpa, who is always looking for more volunteers. So if you're interested in finding a different way to attend these events for free, you can go to this QR code, sign up, and become a WCS volunteer. There's so many opportunities. Almost everyone in the organization is a volunteer, and it takes truly a village. So please do consider joining. And find us in the virtual world. We're on many different platforms. And I hope that we will all see each other again soon. So really do thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.